Good evening and welcome, and thank you for joining us this evening. My name is Audrey Lichter, the Executive Director of Chai Mitzvah, the Resource Center for Jewish Engagement. Today's Scholars Circle topic is Tuition Up, Truth Down, How Academia's Echo Chamber Fuels the Fire Outside, featuring Scott Shea. Chai Mitzvah is a national organization now celebrating its 16th year. We are the sponsor of Scholars Circle and a Jewish resource center that focuses on building community through Jewish engagement programs. We have over 20 curricula tailored for small group conversations for teens and adults, lay or professionally led. For more information, please visit our website at chaimitzvah.org. The Scholar Circle program was inspired by Scott Shea, our speaker tonight. Scott is our founder and board president, who authored a best-selling book, Conspiracy U, A Case Study, which unpacks anti-Zionist conspiracy theories from the left and the right of the political spectrum. We are offering this book tonight, free of charge, to all participants. To order, please see the link in our chat box or send an email to me, Audrey, at chaimitzvah.org. To order bulk copies, please email me directly. Information will also be available on our follow-up email. The curriculum was also taught in a recorded series by Dr. Andrew Pessin. You will receive all this information in our follow-up email as well. The Scholars Circle hosts prominent scholars every 2 weeks on topics relating to Israel and the Jewish community, geared towards rabbis, educators, and lay leaders who are charged with explaining the complex issues the Jewish community is facing. To that end, each lecture will have a resource guide that will be sent to you after the lecture. A recording of each lecture is accessible on our website and shared with you through email. We are excited to continue the Scholars Circle program and need your support to keep it thriving. Scholars Circle has engaged over 3,000 participants since 10/7. Your donation will enable us to continue bringing international scholars to you at no charge to share their expertise on the evolving Jewish world in the aftermath of October 7th. Please help us reach our goal of 40,000. Thank you to all of you who have already participated in this campaign. To make a donation, please visit chaimitzvah.org, click on the gold menu tab, Scholars Circle, and select Support Scholars Circle. This will be included in our follow-up email as well. Thank you again for considering supporting this program. Today's program is an interview format, and we welcome questions anytime using the Zoom Q&A box. The program's recording will be sent to your email in a few days and will also be available on our website at chaimitzvah.org. Scott, welcome to the Scholars Circle.
It's good to be with you as always, Audrey.
Okay. So Scott, we're going to have a conversation tonight about the college campus. We have 5 major areas that we'd like to unpack. Problem diagnosis, the historical context of this problem on the college campus, financial pressures, public trust, ideological conformity and the campus culture, and policy, government influence, and reform and responsibility. So it's a tall agenda. So let's start with, give us some historical context. Diagnose the problem for us on the college campus.
Well, the problem is enormous, and like every problem it has that's of this size, it's essentially bipartisan, and it's essentially was emerged from a situation that people broadly understood. Now, let's not forget that historically, universities were not friendly places for Jews. If you look at the European universities, it was really only in the 20th century that Jews had free reign to go to university. Universities have been started by, in many cases, by the church of that country. They were monks, they became teachers, and so on. In the United States, the universities were also generally, in the beginning, started in one of 2 ways: by churches, and also by land grant colleges, which was a tremendous democratization of the university. But the fancy universities here, sort of the Ivy Leagues, plus some like Stanford, Northwestern, University of Chicago, Duke, you can add to the list as you like. They really were not that friendly to Jews for most of their existence. Northwestern, around the year 1900, bragged about the fact that it had a Jew on campus. The originally Northwestern was founded by the Methodist Church, and the name of the football team, or the slogan of the football team, were the Fighting Methodists, which seems like a little bit of a not. I would hope a non sequitur, but they were the fighting Methodists. For Northwestern, like many fancy universities, there was a quota. There was a period of time, like in Europe, where Jews embraced university. So in times like the teens and 20s, many Jews were attending university in grossly disproportionate numbers to their percentage in the population. And universities, really starting with Columbia, but quickly catching on. Actually, not starting with the Ivies, and quickly catching on, became very concerned about having too many Jews and assigned quotas to Jews. At Northwestern, which I'm going to pick on a lot tonight, Jews were subject to a quota until 1970. At Harvard until the 60s, Yale. Columbia actually set up a separate school. It was a community college where they were trying to shunt Jews to a sister campus in Brooklyn. So starting, let's say, in the late 60s, 1970 for Northwestern, it was a golden age for Jews on campus. And most people on this call lived through that golden age. In the 60s, you could get into a University of Pennsylvania or to a Columbia based on merit. And that situation persisted until really the early 2000s, this sort of golden age, where Jews were embraced on campus, and flourished. But a lot was going on under the surface. Campus faculties were becoming increasingly radicalized. As I talk about in Conspiracy of You, and I don't want to unpack it entirely now, people on the far left and far right mindfully were trying to subvert faculties, mindfully were trying to subvert faculties, and were, to a great degree, unfortunately, successful. So by the time you got to 2020, there were many faculties, there were many departments at many universities where you could not actually be accepted as a graduate student if you had been to Israel in a positive way, endorsed Israel, were okay with a two-state solution. You had professors passing along, as I detail in the book, conspiracy theories about Jews, masquerading as academic theories. So a lot happened under the surface. We as a Jewish community, and frankly, and this is what I argue, the broader community was not paying attention while universities were essentially, and academia was hijacked. And the results have been terrible for the students, terrible for society, and I worry, terrible for our future.
We hear a lot about Qatar and their historic funding of the universities. Can you speak a little bit about how the universities were funded to to change the Middle East Studies departments and other areas, the impact of this funding?
Well, you have to give the enemies of the Jews and enemies of Israel a lot of credit. And you have to give Qatar a lot of credit. I mean, you have a royal family that's worth today conservatively $350 billion, just the family wealth. And they took that wealth and they said, how can we find the levers of of Western civilization and how can we undermine them? And they were very smart because the funnel for essentially all of the elites in the West is university. And that's the place to go. I mean, that's where a future president of the United States was probably already graduated from Columbia and was walking by the encampments or Northwestern or Harvard or Stanford or another place or Berkeley. It's already up and they were very smart. Future teachers of America, education policies, curriculum in K through 12, all passes through the funnel of universities. So if you can invest heavily in universities and subverting the faculty, you can be extraordinarily effective on influencing society. And the Qataris, again, have to give them a lot of credit. Jews were naming buildings. There's the Schwartz building and the Friedman building and the this building and the that building. And Qatar and, China to a certain degree, Saudi Arabia, Qatar was the biggest, said, no, let's figure out a way to actually bring faculty into our way of thinking. And basic ISGAP which is a think tank based at Oxford University, based in Oxford, on anti-Semitism, has actually done a study, and you can directly correlate increased anti-Semitic incidences at universities with Qatari funding. Now, when I wrote Conspiracy U, there was really not a lot being said about Qatar. And even though Qatar was required and foreign countries are required to register donations to universities, it was really reporting was lax, let's put it that way. And it was very difficult to determine who was giving what to whom. If you had looked on the spreadsheet in the Department of Education, which I spent a lot of time going through, it was basically like a big blotter. It was very difficult to total up. Okay, this is what it was going to Northwestern. This is what's going to Harvard. This is what's going to Yale. This is what's going to University of Chicago. Very difficult. Now that's been made much easier, and frankly, the reporting is much better. But for many, many years, this was going on. And you have, for example, at Northwestern, a professor of anthropology at Qatar, at Education City at Qatar, that teaches that the Eldura hoax was a fact, teaches other things that are.
What is that, Scott?
The Eldura hoax, everybody will remember. Many years ago, there was this image of a man, a father, holding a young boy, and there was crossfire, and he was protecting his bleeding son. It turns out the whole thing was staged by a French television station. It was actually theater, not. It was live. It wasn't even live theater. It was staged theater, and but it's being taught as fact by at least one Northwestern professor. That Northwestern professor of anthropology also puts Hassan Nasrallah in the same category as Mahatma Gandhi, as Nelson Mandela, as really great,
Martin Luther King,
prominent leaders. Well, he's saying Hassan Nasrallah should be viewed in that way because violence is just one of his many tools for peace.
Let's delve a little bit more into the messaging. What exactly is so nefarious about the messaging that has been that has infiltrated the college campuses and these departments? What specific attitudes towards Israel, towards Jews, towards the Middle East? What can you tell us specifically has corrupted the college academic campus?
Well, let's start with what I'd say is sort of blatant anti-Semitism. And that one book that I, again, talk about in Conspiracy You, written by a Northwestern professor um, with a co-author, talks about how all anthropology, it's a book. And the premise is that that in order to get anthropology um, tenure, one has to be approved by Zionists, whether Christian, Jewish, um, that Hillel rabbis are spies, that there are monitors in classrooms taking notes on what the anthropology professors are saying. It's a book length analysis of this. They collected all the data from the entire profession, and they found 3 instances that they say, is that they can find that's evidence of this. In one evidence, in the two where the person was up for, people were up for tenure, they got tenure. In the third case, someone was up for an administrative position, already had tenure, and decided not to do the administration position. At the end of the book, they say the Zionists and the Jews, they're so good that they covered up all the evidence, and we couldn't find any, which proves how pervasive this conspiracy is. Now, if that isn't the definition of a conspiracy theory, where you say only you understand it, we can't find any evidence, but trust us, it's so pervasive, it must be the case. When you actually have an anthropology discipline that is pretty strenuously anti-Israel.
Talk to us for a minute about the difference between a theory and a conspiracy theory.
Yeah. So that's very important because that's also something that's fundamental to academia, totally fundamental to academia. And yet now you can't even get academics to distinguish that. And by the way, one of the things that I recommend is that every student be required to take a class in what is real academic evidence and what's conspiracy theory stuff. So a theory, an academic theory, is I have a hypothesis. Now I'm going to collect data, which I'm going to do without bias, and I'm going to figure out whether or not the data confirms or doesn't confirm the idea. For example, and this is an example again I give in the book, you could have a theory that A murdered B. Okay, now you try to assemble evidence that A murdered B. And this is what any police officer, DA tries to do. And if you can collect evidence, great. But you can't make up more evidence based on theories. You have to actually have evidence that something happened. On the other hand, if you can't find any evidence that A murdered B, you can say, and it took place, you could say, well, we don't have evidence. So I can't prove my hypothesis. You can't say, well, the evidence doesn't really matter because I have a good enough theoretical construct. For example, that Israel is a settler fits into a settler colonial view of the world. Well, it violates all the evidence. There is no metropole. There's no home. There's no Belgium to come back to from the Congo. There's that it was a European imperialist project, and the Jews really came from the Pale of Russia. again, total conspiracy theories that Jews didn't exist, but there's some sort of an outgrowth of Khazars, so that even though there might have been Jews in the background, 2,000 years ago in Israel, those aren't the same people, which of course dismisses the Mizrahi Jews and the Sephardi Jews. It actually doesn't matter. You want to prove your point. And what's happened is that this lack of being able to reason is why when people leave university, they're so susceptible to all other conspiracy theories. Late Jewish laser beams, and they go on and on. Not all of them are Jewish. Not all of them relate to the Jews, although many seem to. Um, and uh, and we actually have some empirical evidence of that. In that, um, it used to be, frankly, when we were going to college, that if you tested entrance to college on their reasoning abilities and you tested them at the end of college, in the humanities and the social sciences, the reasoning abilities had improved dramatically. Now, that's not the case. People leave university with their minds stuffed with, I'd love to say facts, but with, in some cases, indoctrination, but they actually can't reason any better when you give them the same, test. That's really quite depressing. Um, that that the university isn't creating more thinking individuals. As a matter of fact, it may be creating less thinking individuals. One study of anti-Semitism that I thought was an interesting study that I also noted is a study taken whereby people were asked, two different groups that were deemed pretty identical in views. There was tests to make sure that they were identical in views in general, and they had the same distribution of uh, less than high school education, college education, and various higher degree of educations. They were asked a pair of questions, such as, is it acceptable to, so each of the two groups were asked different questions. One group was asked, is it acceptable to make accommodation for Seventh-day Adventists to take off Saturday from work? Whereas the other group was asked, is it acceptable for Jewish people to be allowed to take off Saturday? The other was, another question was, and I'm just going to give you some, another question was, should the American military allow Sikhs to wear head covering that is not conforming with military attire? And then the other group would, should the military allow Jews in the military to wear kippot? I don't know exactly how, yarmulkes. I don't know exactly what term they used, but that was the question. And there were several others. There was only one question that related to dual loyalties, and that was, should Mexican citizens of the United States do they have a special affinity toward Mexico? And then they asked the same question about Jews and Israel. That was the only question that you could sort of say, maybe that'll be an outlier. Well, it turns out all of these questions had almost identical responses. In the case of people with high school education, they didn't distinguish as much between the two groups. People in college substantially disfavored Jews. And people who went to academic degrees, masters and PhDs, particularly in the humanities, disfavored Jews by something like double. So if you went through a PhD program, you were really banged over the head that Jews, settler colonialists or whatever they are. But it used to be that the answer to anti-Semitism was considered to be education. Well, now, sadly, the more education, the more anti-Semitism. And that's because these universities have been utterly subverted.
So Let's talk a little bit, dig deeper a little bit into that. We had Miriam Ellman on from the Academic Engagement Network a number of sessions ago, and she spoke about how difficult it is to be a Zionist professor on the college campus. So, speak a little bit about how deep this problem is, not just for students and what they're learning about, but also what it means for the Zionist professors or people who have an affinity towards Israel to actually, what do we know about that? Um, yeah.
Well, it's pretty bleak too. I have talked to people who had problems getting appointments at in archaeology departments just because they had participated in a dig in
Mm.
it. People in archaeology and in other groups were actually scrubbing their CVs of participation with um, Israeli academics, um, participation in Israel, of um, academic pursuits. It's actually becoming a problem for the Israeli universities, excuse me, to get as many people as they need for PhD dissertation committees because some people are just doing a quiet boycott of Israel. Not even so much because they may have a personal problem with Israel, but because they don't want to have they don't want to have the problem of it being on their CV or it being used against them. It's quite pervasive. Um, as I said previously, there are many departments where it's very difficult in the United States to be accepted as a graduate student if you have um, somehow an Israel connection. There are medical schools where I've talked to medical students who have scraped from their resume in applying for medical school, lab work or other things done, or volunteer paramedic stuff in Israel. Uh, the far left and the far right is a subsidiary problem on campus. It's not a big problem. It's a big problem in the rest of society, but we're talking about campus right now. The far left is not afraid of using power on campus. I have talked to professors who really cower, um, uh, particularly those without tenure.
Um, is there a connection between, let's talk a little bit about the financial pressures on universities and the tuition. Does it correlate with this, the money they're getting, the research? I mean, there's a lot of uproar about the cutting in research funding. Are you in favor of that? Do you think it's a good idea to penalize the universities financially for their anti-Semitic tone on the campus?
So I think that in the near term, penalizing the universities, I think, fundamentally think they can outlast this administration. Um, and I think deeper work needs to be done, um, in all candor. I think the previous administration, and this isn't a political, this is just a judgment of what happened, really turned the other side, turned the other way on campus anti-Semitism. And there's some who believe now that this administration is using anti-Semitism as a excuse to as an excuse. In the Monday print edition of the Wall Street Journal, and previously it was posted online, there was a long article about Northwestern and its business model and its problems. And it is always possible to find this great and noble research project that is now going to be problematic. But at the same time, there are serious problems at the medical school at Northwestern in terms of anti-Israelism, anti-Zionism, and people who have told me applying to medical school that they've scrubbed, as I said just a few moments ago, they've scrubbed their Israel-related activities. That was shocking to me because I frankly earlier, and this is just in a few years, had found that the issues were more prominent in the humanities, somewhat less so in the social sciences, and substantially less so in the medical schools. But at the University of California at Berkeley, at their medical school, you had a professor who outwardly said that they would try to harm a Jew who was their patient. You've had other university related people who have said things that clearly would violate the Hippocratic Oath regarding Jews. So tough medicine is necessary, but it's more fundamental than even the government grants. At Harvard, for example, and at many of the fancy universities, 25% of the student population is foreign, which is in a way good because the idea was bring foreign students and inculcate them to an open society. On the other hand, it's apparently Harvard is considered in China as the party school. And when they say party, they mean the CCP, the Chinese Communist Party school, where people from the elites were going. And what you have is something much more deleterious than just a way for universities to subsidize their budgets, because the foreign students pay full freight. They don't qualify for any financial aid. But you have a lot of students who otherwise from the United States who should get in, but don't get in. And you have a tremendous amount of genuflecting to governments that are far, far afield from our vision of society. And it's very troubling. And then you look at, okay, what is the product of universities? And I'm going to give you some shocking statistics that I invite people after that we're done to go on Google, use your favorite AI assistant, and you'll confirm these numbers because they're Bureau of Labor Statistics numbers. And they look at the unemployment rate by different age cohorts. So from the age cohort from say 23 to 30, they look at unemployment among that cohort. If you went to college, you are a four-year college and you graduated, your unemployment rate was 15.1% or so, if I remember, 15%, let's call it. If you went to community college, it was about 2.5%. That's where people are learning to be dental hygienists. That's where they're learning to have all sorts of technical degrees in the medical, in the mechanical, and other professions. And then in vocational schools, it's about 7-ish%. And there, the problem is a different one. And again, this isn't a political conversation, but that the vocational schools would be much better, except that because migrants and generally not illegal immigrants can't get the licenses that are needed for the jobs of the 2-year degrees, like dental hygienist requires a license. You have to be a citizen or a green card or have documents. So there tend to be able, though, to compete off the books or with just a social security number that's a fake number in the vocational area. But the headline that should shock people is the 15% unemployment of people who are graduating with Middle East studies degrees or humanities degrees and they're not getting any job.
Hmm.
It's a total disaster. But for those American students, because we're not talking about the 25% who are abroad, they are buried in debt. And so what are the universities doing for and to society right now? I think we need, that's why I think the the withholding of certain grants is interesting, as a bludgeon, but it's not getting at the root problem that universities are no longer a positive force for America. It's a serious problem. Universities are what made us great in the United States in many ways. And now they may drag us down.
We, we learned from Miriam Ellman that most universities, there's something like 2,000 universities or colleges in the country, and really most universities don't have this necessarily have this problem, but it's the elite universities, the places where Jews tend to be, that are having this problem. And of course, those are the universities where you get your leadership of the tech leadership, business leadership, financial leadership, political leadership. So that's what makes it so problematic that even if it's not affecting most universities, the ones that are affected are the ones that have the most impact on society.
Well, I call them that's why I call them the fancy universities, just
All
to
right.
put them in a
Uh,
group. I mean, obviously I'm saying that ruefully, but just like what I said before about how it starts at the fancy universities, that's where people are then going to the university, to Kansas City State, and they've graduated, University of Pennsylvania in political with a political science PhD, and now they're going there and they're teaching that Israel is a settler colonial state, that it's just embarked on evil. They're teaching, using um, books that have been written by professors that are amazingly conspiratorial. I mean, I cite some of them in Conspiracy U, um, where the Jews are blamed in academic books that have been written by Duke. Jews are blamed for the Holocaust. Um, it's frightening. It's hard to believe, but those can be assigned to Kansas City State or someplace else. I'm not picking on them. So the fancy universities have a disproportionate impact. I don't think right now it's pervasive, but the flip side is if the Jews abandon the fancy universities, then there won't be anybody, to have a dissenting view, which, by the way, is the way universities like it. No dissenting views. Here's truth. We don't discuss anymore. We used to do that. We don't do it anymore. Now just believe what we tell you.
so let's flip a little bit now and think about what constructive roles we can play both on an individual level, on a faculty level, on a board trustee level, on an administrative level, perhaps on a state or federal level. What kinds of positive things can be implemented or can we do to address some of these issues on the college campus?
Well, I wrote an article some time ago when the United States, when the federal government was just printing money and giving it to states, that what I thought a wise state should do is to create a new university because there was so much money that people couldn't count it. And they were using it for things that, were unbelievably just unbelievable. I said some smart state should create a new campus from scratch where they would have people of dissenting views. Yes, you can have a Marxist, but you should also have some capitalists. Yes, you can have atheists, but you better also have some believers, and actually create a university with diversity of thought, not just diversity in personal identities, because if everybody's going to say the same thing in unison, it really, you're not, you really haven't accomplished much. So I wrote an article. Maybe we can post it to the website, but you'll recall it. And so I thought that was one thing, but sadly that train has left the station because people mostly wasted their big block grants from COVID. They didn't mostly waste them, but they didn't put them to long-term productive use. They put them to short-term use. The second thing we need to do is to be vocal. And I mean, Jewish alumni should, when they're asked to give money, ask questions and not just, listen to all the pretty nothings that are whispered into their ears. Sadly, many Jewish trustees of universities, and I've talked to a number of them, they much prefer the kavod, the prestige of being a university trustee and getting to wear a gown and maybe getting an honorary doctorate than they do with defending Jewish values. It's really troublesome. Even those who know better don't do it. And I've talked to a number of trustees who said, well, they now give only toward buildings and gardens and stuff because a garden can't become anti-Semitic. Well, they've essentially relinquished the field to people who are smart enough to make sure that their professors who are saying, what they want said. And it's really remarkable that we don't make a bigger stink of that. Additionally, I think more Jews should consider attending getting a degree in Israel in English. Several of the universities offer degrees in English. Reichman University. I mean, there's a number of them that are excellent institutions. You can get a degree in they're 3-year degrees. They're certainly on par with a 4-year American degree. And I think that, and looking at campuses that are Jewish friendly. I think there, as I said before, abandoning the universities, the fancy universities, is a problem. But I also wrote an article that you'll recall, advice to high school seniors that I wrote, don't apply to Northwestern.
We should say that you're an alum of Northwestern,
yeah,
and more of your children attended Northwestern. So
right.
you say that with a heavy heart, I'm sure.
I say that with a very heavy heart. And I used to be very involved. I used to be on one of the school sort of visiting committee groups or whatever they called it. I used to be very involved, but Northwestern has definitely turned a blind eye to blatant anti-Semitism. You can get away with anything, frankly, as long as it's about saying something negative about Israel. If you said that same thing about any other group, you'd be expelled for saying the exact same thing. Just change the identity group.
We do have a question going back to faculty. The question is, how do peer-reviewed journals factor into promotions of the anti-Semitic conspiracy theories? Are the journals part of the university departments or are they independent?
So the peer journals are independent, but there is a club, and I talk about this too in the book, there's a club-like aspect to them. You endorse my article, I'll endorse your article. We're all endorsing each other's article. And by the way, it's harder to get into that club. And that's a serious problem. But if you're in the club, you're okay. So if you're talking settler colonial stuff, you're good to go. You can write, I've read articles in peer-reviewed journals that are unintelligible, make no sense, and if I were grading them, would get an F. Forget about whether I agree with the content or not. Some of them are unreadable. and make no sense. They're internally inconsistent, and they get through peer journal. I mean, um, uh, uh, some of the books I've read, and I can cite one that even won awards. I challenge anyone to read that whole book. I don't think anyone ever has, including the editor who published it at Duke, because it's unintelligible. The sentences don't make sense. I mean, again, setting aside that they are conspiratorial, that they're, without fact, they actually just don't make sense. Um, and I don't want to go to it now, but I'm tempted to pull down and start just reading at random some of the books. So what I think there ought to be is that the universities should say before something is published that has the name, I don't know, University of Maryland or Yale or whatever university, that there's a formal program that the department parcels that out to other university people in other universities or has relationships with other universities and anonymously asks for comments and does it in a viewpoint diverse way and says you can't publish anything unless it passes this screen. Because let's also not forget the journals also have their own agendas. And, the largest medical journals called the idea that the Wuhan virus could have come from Wuhan, a conspiracy theory. Lancet, um, Scientific American. That's basically what happened. Well, I'm not saying it was intentional, but the CIA, the FBI, the Department of Health under the Biden administration all came to that conclusion. And the
There's a
Department of
question.
Energy, too, strangely, came to that conclusion.
To this idea of conspiracy theories, so addressing this, a question about what would you say to those who say that we cannot succeed unless we get large numbers of non-Jews to assist in correcting these problems? Is it
100%.
just a Jewish problem?
It is not just a Jewish problem. What I was saying before, it's a societal problem. I mean, people are being taught not just to hate Jews, but let me be clear. A lot of the books that I read, the only people who are hated more than Zionists or as much as Zionists, it's hard to say, are what are termed in academia Americanists. Now, I never even heard of that term before I started doing research on and for Conspiracy U. But Americanists are really devils too. And
What are Americanists?
what are Americanists? That's a good question. They are people who don't agree with academia. They're for America and the idea of America and the idea that America is a melting pot, the idea that meritocracy is important, the idea that people should work hard, that we should be colorblind. Now, whether you agree with any of that, okay, you can disagree, but they're put into a category of evil for
And
having values that were normative 25, 30 years ago. That's an Americanist.
And of course, analyzing our history in a different light and rewriting some of our heroes or people, seeing it in a different light now. Maybe there needed to be a course correction a little bit, but
I agree. But there didn't need to be a wholesale repudiation and sort of a hatred of the United States.
Right. So in the time we have remaining, what would you like to leave us with? What kinds of since you've written Conspiracy U, now that's already a few years now, and I know that when the book came out, people called you an alarmist, and nobody was interested, and you were blackballed from your friends at Northwestern for sure. But in general, we had a pretty hard time getting people to pay attention to what you were saying. I always say Scott Shea's ahead of his time in lots of ways, if you've known him as long as I have. But So in the time since you've written Conspiracy U to now, are things worse? Are they better? Are we on a better trajectory, or what are you thinking?
I think it's worse.
In
I
what
think the administrations have been further captured. Um, they are really, I mean, the first hearing with the Harvard, University of Pennsylvania, and MIT testimony are what people really think at the administration level. They're now being taught that they got to fancy that up. And they've got to sound more, um, more mainstream. So, but I have read people send me emails that they've received from faculty and they've received from an administration, and they are worse than what I was reading before. And they are, um, I mean, I have seen Jews who have written letters to universities with responses that are just unbelievably harsh. Um, and I think you might shut down a DEI department, but if you move those folks into HR and other places, you haven't really accomplished that much. And I think that's why I think everybody needs to get involved in this. I think we need a fundamental rethink of how many universities we need, how many people, what the influence of foreign money and whether foreign money should be even accepted at universities. Um, what happens? Is there a tipping point when 25% of students are um, from foreign countries, many of which are enemies of the United States? What all that means. And I think, you know, during the 19th century, the UK had to rethink its universities in a fundamental way. They were creatures of the church. Um, they were, very particularistic, and they had a wholesale discussion of it in Parliament and in society. And I think we need that now. We need to really not talk about, oh, this grant has gotten canceled. We need to talk about where we go from here. And I am, and I think if we don't do anything, I think it is a greater threat, a greater national security threat to the United States than really any external force.
So who has that conversation, and how does that happen?
I think it has to happen in Congress. I think there needs to be new legislation that requires, for example, I think endowments. I'm great with endowments. I don't think you need to tax them, but I think they should be spent, say, 10% a year, certainly north of 5%. And that would make universities remain relevant and have to raise operating funds, as opposed to just if you're at Harvard and um, you have a $54 billion endowment, you're really an endowment with a university on the side.
Mm.
Northwestern, as it says in the article, has been papering over the government grants by taking money from the endowment. So it's a real thing. Um, that universities can have vast resources. I think that's okay, but make them spend those vast resources on students as opposed to just growing them again by taking foreign students, paying full freight who are very profitable, um, and government grants.
There's a question here about college administrators and what do they actually know, referring specifically to what happened at Columbia Barnard with the Samadown issue, the webinar. The college administrators acted shocked that they didn't understand or know. Do you think the college administrators have a pulse? Uh, are they purposely are they purposely fomenting this, or are they just not in tune with what's happening here?
I think they just want to. Um, I think they are in tune. I think they understand what's going on, and the only reason they'll care is if they're made to care.
Mm.
I'm really talking to administrators. They come from faculty in many cases. Um, they share the same views as the faculty, um, and if they can shield faculty, they will.
Mm.
I mean, it's a short answer, but I think it's an accurate answer.
So you were just wrapping up and talking about the Congress starts at Congress. What else? Who else is going to have this conversation and
I
how
think
it?
it has to be a society-wide conversation.
Mm.
I think we have to stop talking about this or that grant and talk about you've got the fancy universities and you've got other universities. You've got foreign funding, you've got students being crushed under debt. Um, we have to talk about what is the role of the university. We're graduating, as I said, 15.1% of graduates with BAs or BSs are unemployed, and up to in the up to 30 cohort. This is it's really it's an emergency.
Mm.
The universities are not adding value to society. And I say that as someone who loved my university experience. But sadly, um, we need to get everyone involved in this conversation, and it is to be depoliticized.
Mm.
And I want to just say thank you, Audrey, for the questions and for leading this and for all the work you do. Um, for Chai Mitzvah, for Scholar Circle, certainly Nina Walden, and Simon Lichter do an amazing job pulling together just a high quality program, with the exception of, I'm not present, one I'm not talking about necessarily, but all of the programs from Miriam Elman, Dr. Pessin, two of whom you mentioned, but just a month after month, you're bringing just super high quality programming, and we're all really benefiting from that.
Thank you. Thank you. Yes. And, Scott has been very committed. We're very committed to making this at a high level. Scholars, PhDs, people from universities doing this work, and they all receive honorariums. And that's why we need to keep raising some funds to keep this free and open to everyone who attends. And over 3,000 of you have attended since October 7th, and we're very, very pleased about that. And we want to keep this an open forum and keep you informed from people that are dedicating their lives to this field of, and so we're all really committed to that. So thank you, Scott. It was, everybody stayed on. Nobody left the talk, and that's a credit to you. So clearly you captivated the group. And so in this vein, our next Scholar Circle features Dr. Shale Horowitz, who many of you have met before from the University of Wisconsin. And we're doing something different. His topic is called Ink and Intent, Political Cartoons Unpacked. And I have to say, I've done a little research on political cartoons, and you will really be shocked at what the impact of a political cartoon and the messaging that Al Jazeera is sending out, and what the Arab world is receiving, and what messages they're getting through these political cartoons. So it's going to be on Wednesday, July 2nd at 7 p.m. So we hope to see you all there. And again, I want to remind you, all of you who were at this lecture tonight, we are sending the book at no charge to you. So you just have to either send me your address, or in the chat, there's the link, or you'll get it in the follow-up email as well. We'd really highly recommend Conspiracy U. And if you want to create a circle in your community and more people reading it, please email me and we can talk about a bulk transfer of the book, but that'll require a little bit of a conversation. So thank you all tonight. It was great, a great talk, Scott. Thanks so much.